Ozzy, you want to say anything to begin, or you want me to start?
Yeah, thank you all for joining the call. It looks like we have Gary, John. Is Eric on?
Yes.
I'm hearing Eric and Keith. Would y'all just tell us, just say your name and congregation so Mike knows who you are, those who are on.
Keith Pearson here. I'm actually not with the congregation, but with the ELCA Foundation.
Okay.
And I'm Gary Lodeholt. I'm at Redeemer Lutheran Church here in Columbia.
And I'm Jan Setzler with Novus Way Ministries.
Eric Fink with Living Springs Lutheran.
Okay. Good. Thank you all for joining the call. We have Mike Ward with us today. Mike is, he leads our Stewardship for All Season cohorts in South Carolina for the last 2 years. And Mike has come online today to talk about stewardship in a time of social distancing. And he is also the author of a book that just came out, Fortress Press in 2020, called Abundance, Creating a Culture of Generosity. And what you will hear from him today, I think, are many of the principles of that book that he has recently written. So Mike, we thank you very much for coming to tell us about this journey to create a culture of generosity in a time like this.
I just tried talking with my mute on, sorry. Great, it's good to be with you and good to share some time. As far as I know, I didn't take attendance last time we did this, but I know Jan was on and I think maybe that was it. But I'm gonna make this different a little bit than the last one. I've kind of got some new things I'm kind of starting to focus on. I will refer back to things that were covered in that last session. I put in the chat box, does everybody see chat from me? Because I did this at another synod and I did it too early. Okay. The link at the Siebert Foundation is the original webinar that I kind of did for synods. Jan, it's what you heard last time. I mean, it didn't change much. And so if you want to capture what I did 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago now, it's at that first link. The second link is a link to my blog, where we're continually as a firm putting up new resources as they come to us that are there. I think I just I know I just posted something on, what do you do if you take a new call during this time or, enter into your first call. So also communication will be something big that we talk about. There's a video on communication, some other resources there, just kind of there for you. So take a look. If you like what you see, you can sign up to be notified when stuff comes out. If you don't like what you see, just move on. There's no obligation of any kind. And I want to make sure that we have time for your questions, concerns, dialogue. This isn't going to just be me talking. And if you get really bored, apparently you can watch my cat in the corner of the screen now, at least I'm noticing. So some entertainment for you if I get long-winded. But kind of the first thing I want to talk about is, we've made it through Easter. We've kind of, and now it seems like we're living into this. Not exactly sure when we're going to get back face to face. And I think it's time that we do a little bit of analysis. I think that analysis can likely wait till April is over, but that's next week, okay? And I think the analysis we need to do, the first thing I would do for analysis would be probably to take everybody who hasn't given in the period of time that you've been out of the sanctuary for worship, where you've been doing virtual worship. I'd get that list, anybody, and I don't know what your date was, March 10th or, around there or the week after, and just have your financial folks pull the list of people who didn't make a gift in that period of time. Now, some people, it'll be natural that they don't make a gift in that period of time because they always just, give a once a year gift in the fall or, end of the year kind of thing. They're not your concern. The people of concern are the folks that, you know, they gave in January, they gave in February, they gave in March, and they miss April. You know, that's where I'm going to start to flag. And I'm going to order this list in, you know, highest giver to lowest giver. And I'm going to see, you know, are we missing many of our largest givers? Or are all the people that we're missing in the lower givers? Because we don't know exactly how to respond until we know who's missing, right? You know, it could be, as we look at our numbers, we're a little bit off, and it turns out it's one donor. Or you know, it turns out that we've got a large number of donors who are missing. If it's the case that we have a large number of smaller donors missing, we probably need to deploy tactics like text to give and other more spontaneous ways to give in the midst of our worship services. Which, by the way, I am highly recommending that we still have an offering during the worship service. And during the offering, it's a time to tell generosity stories and outcome stories. And it's a time to create a graphic, hopefully on the screen, that lets people know how they can give online, sending a check, text to give, however. But if we don't do an offering during virtual worship, I think we're starting to tell people that the offering during regular worship is just a fundraising tactic, and we don't know how to do that virtually. But if we believe that offering is part of worship, then I think it needs to find its way into the worship service. I saw a decent example. Good Shepherd Lutheran in Madison, Wisconsin was a client of mine this year. They have a great graphic that they have on the screen. It's at minute 44 of this week's service, if you're really interested. I think they could do a better job of telling generosity stories at the time. And here's what I mean by generosity story. There's a pastor in Durham, North Carolina, texted me late last week. He had just heard from a couple who's not a member of his church, who got their stimulus checks and decided they didn't need them. And they decided they'd give them to Christus Victor. Asked the pastor what they would do with them. I mean, holy cow, that's a generosity story, right? I mean, here's a couple in America that has decided they don't need their stimulus checks, and they're not a member of the church, but they want to give them to the church. That's a story that needs to be told because it can inspire other people to give. I know a person who's going to double their giving in the month of April because, and I think this is a tremendously faithful statement to what Jesus talks about in Matthew 6:34, about not worrying about tomorrow, but not knowing what troubles lie ahead for tomorrow. Said, I don't know what lies ahead. I could very well lose my job. I'm worried about my industry, but I'm doing okay here in April. So I'm going to double my giving for the month of April. Well, that's a generosity story that people need to hear because it's a statement of faith, and it's a statement of, you know, something that I can do because it's what I can do. And so we need to tell those generosity stories because they will stimulate other people to be generous. If we know generosity stories are happening and we keep them to ourselves, they won't inspire others. The cool thing in church is there's a few people who are willing to be leaders in generosity. There's more people willing to be followers, but they won't follow until they know somebody's leading. And so if we keep it all a secret, they won't follow behind and add their generosity story. I had a pastor last week call me and say he was going to tell his congregation that they should tithe off their stimulus checks. And I said, Pastor, I think that's a terrible idea. He was kind of caught off guard, and that was my purpose. I said the church needs to stop telling other people what to do. I said, but if you're going to tithe your stimulus check, you can invite other people to tithe theirs. And if you can't, get somebody on your council to say what they're going to do with their stimulus check and invite other people to do it. I said, but even better, and what I'm wanting is for us to create a join us or a join me culture in giving. Here's what I'm going to do. Will you join me in that? Or here's what we're going to do. Would you join us in that? So I said, why don't you go to your council? Tell your council you're going to tithe your stimulus check because you don't need all of it. I bet you there's some people on your council who don't need any of it. And I told them the story from Christus Victor about 2 non-members giving the whole thing away. I said, I bet there might even be a person on your council who really needs it. But why don't you challenge your entire council to figure out how they can be generous with their stimulus checks? You're going to tithe yours. Let other people tell the stories of what they're going to do with theirs. And invite the person who really needs their stimulus check to figure out a way they can still be generous with it. I think you can still be generous by going out to eat one night, picking up takeout to give your family a nice little treat. And it's being generous because you're helping a restaurant worker keep their job and get paid during this time too. So, I mean, find a way that everybody can be generous and then tell that story to the congregation. And as the pastor and I continued to talk, we got to the point where we were hopeful that maybe about half the money that came from this generosity from the council would stay local in the congregation, and that the other half would be generosity that would bless their ministry partners. I worry, you all know I came out of outdoor ministry. I worry about camps if we can't have a full camp season or any camp season. I don't know what that's going to be. Jan, I'm not here to put you on the spot to prognosticate as to what's going to happen with camp, but I'm a little worried about what it means to our camps. I'm worried what it means for our social service agencies. Our food, my wife and I, we give extra money every month to a food pantry that is now seeing record number of people served every week. How do we keep up? There is plenty of need out there. The goal isn't that our congregation survives this. The goal is that the gospel is proclaimed in the midst of this. And so how do we be generous with all of that? And if the council will lead this with a stimulus check idea, then very well, a lot of people in the congregation will catch on to that. And so kind of moved certainly into communication as those generosity stories. And then it's also telling the stories of impact in the ministries that we are doing. We really need to move from telling people what we do to telling people that what we do is making a difference in people's lives. I heard a story after Easter worship. One of the first comments for a church was from somebody who said, I've never been able to come inside your space yet, but I love the ministry that you're doing. I'm so inspired. Can you send me information about your youth program? Because we're going to get involved as soon as we're able to come back. Thanks for offering, a spirit-filled Easter worship service for us. I know that God's up to stuff in this, and we've got to tell people kind of what that is. And so the reason it's so important to tell these generosity stories and tell these outcome stories now, every recession since 1980 has had 4 stages. The first stage is kind of a jump in giving, a bump in giving. My congregation, we had a $500 challenge gift from ELCA World Hunger if we would add $750 to that. We exceeded that goal in 42 minutes. By the end of the day, we had $4,500 raised for our food pantry thanks to this gift. And that's an illustration of the jump in giving that happens early in a crisis. When the crisis extends, there'll often be a decline in giving. The decline doesn't have to be very significant. And the way to mitigate the decline is that early on, we're telling stories of generosity and impact so that people continue to remember that the ministry of our churches is so vital. And the other good news is that in every recession since 1980, the percentage of income that Protestants give away has increased in those recessions. They may have a little less money, but the percent of money they give away is higher, okay? So we get more generous in times that we see our neighbors in need. So we can keep that decline from really being a big factor if we can do a good job of telling stories of outcome and generosity early on. Then eventually we'll see a surge in giving again, usually led by major donors. I expect right now for that to happen in the fall. Again, this is a crisis that is still unfolding. I may revise that. So you can't quote me in October saying, Mike said in the fall we're going to see a surge in giving if you don't listen to me between now and then, because it may change still, all right? And then we finally settle into a new normal. And so what we're trying to do right now is keep the decline from becoming very significant. And we do that through the witness of generosity from other people and by making sure that we tell the stories that our ministry is having an impact. And so those are kind of the things that I think we really need to engage in now as we are where we are, okay? I want to pause here and open it up to questions, comments, and just kind of get a sense for where y'all are at. We're a small enough group, I think we can do that. So you can start with questions on anything I've talked about, questions you had coming into this, or we can start talking a little bit about kind of where we're at and what we may want to look at and focus on.
This was a story, and I'm not sure what the reaction would be, but it was with tithing the stimulus checks, and that actually came up at our council meeting our March council meeting when it first came, and someone asked the question from council meeting. Someone asked the question: if we get these stimulus checks, when I get ready to tithe it, what do you want me to do with it? And council had this discussion about tithing their stimulus checks and said, well, we want to send a message that any of the tithes from the stimulus checks, we don't want going into operating our regular fund. We're going to create the family assistance fund and let people know that if they tithe if any tithes come in from the stimulus checks, it's going into the family assistance fund to help families who do need more stimulus or more help, which I thought was just a really great conversation that our council had, and maybe shared a witness. Maybe it was a Matthew 6 witness that they were able to give, that we're not going to worry about, we're not ultimately going to worry about can we pay our bills, but we're going to do this to in some generous way of a sense of abundance. So I just wasn't anything that I necessarily led, but it was just something that inspired me personally.
I think that's fantastic. I think that's fantastic, Eric. Thank you. We lost your video. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but we don't see you anymore.
No, that's fine. That was my unintentional blessing for you. My camera comes and goes.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, I think it's gone now.
Eric, while you're still unmuted, how is giving going right now to the congregation? Do you have any reports?
We've been pretty stable because we tend to get we've got to do some more analysis. We've been able to function because our patterns, some of our large one-time gifts that people give have tended to come in the spring just because that's their pattern. So we would tend to be significantly ahead through 3 or 4 quarters the past few years. I mean, 3 or 4 months the past three years, and that's been able to sustain us. We're not as ahead as we normally would be, so we've got to do some more analysis about that. But in terms of responses, like to our COVID helping projects, much like you, we identified 4 or 5 projects early on and said we got a goal of $2,500 and had twice that much within a week or so. And it's just, so that initial bump is still was definitely an example of what we experienced.
That's great. That's great. And the more you tell stories of that generosity and then the stories of impact as you deploy that money, the more that's going to sustain current giving to the congregation. And then the next time you may need a special gift to make an impact somewhere. So that's great. That's great. Gary, how are things for you?
Sorry, I was unmuting myself. We're fine. I'm here mainly because our weekly giving is down some, which I anticipated. And, and of course we had Easter, which is usually a big day for us, and that was down. And so our council will meet on Sunday, and we're trying to figure out, what our steps are and what we do.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping to learn.
Okay. Do you have any stories of generosity that have kind of thrown themselves in your face yet?
One of the things, not particularly of direct dollars, one of the things that has come out of all this, many churches are doing a little an outdoor kiosk thing called a blessing box. You may have encountered that before. And we had a member just off the blue offered to make one, and they're installing it on Saturday. And there were some people who initially, it was interesting, were, well, people will steal out of it.
Hmm.
You can't steal what we're giving away. Kind of an interesting little take. And so we're hoping to use that as one way of encouraging that kind of generosity.
That's certainly a generosity story. So I think that's great. So have you had any stories of people that have like all of a sudden given an extra significant gift?
No, sir.
And is that something that tends to be kept from you there?
I'm not sure as much as kept from me as just I don't typically inquire what people give.
Yeah. So, and I get that. And that's kind of I ask that more in South Carolina than most places, but it's true across the country. I'd encourage you to talk to your financial people and say, can you just alert me if somebody breaks their pattern for the good and tell me that, or if they seem to be breaking their pattern negatively, so that I can just do a care call. So that if, you don't have to know they doubled their giving, but you can know that they were increased the generosity. So you can call and say, hey, I don't know what you did, but I know that you've increased your generosity. I've been made aware of that. I just want to call and say thanks. And can you tell me why you chose to do it? And in that, there's still confidentiality kept in the traditions in which it is. But at the same time, you're giving people an opportunity to say, oh, I've been so blessed through this and I see my neighbor hurting, or they can give you then that story. And it's an easier, safer way to get the story. You could also possibly talk to the council about how have you been more generous in this time, because everybody can do that. You're not saying how have you given more money away, right?
Right.
But how have you figured out how to be more generous in these days when we know the church is, doing more work and more important in people's lives than ever? I've heard people say before, well, I have less income, but I'm giving a larger percentage, which is more generous. I mean, and a very faithful response. And when that happens to people and people are appreciated for that, they'll continue that new giving percentage on the other side. And so I encourage you to pay more attention, even without digging in necessarily to everybody's life. Although I personally don't have a problem with that. I just also know,
Right.
I know the traditions of the area in which you live. So, but that's a way to discover the generosity stories. And it may be a fun way to talk to the council first before you have the conversation as to what this all means. How have you chosen to be more generous? Can we start sharing that story with people so that maybe they start to find ways to be more generous here? The stimulus checks, I do lift that up as a story because that is an opportunity that's kind of right in front of us right now. Some people need them, some people need part of them, and some people don't need them at all. I mean, but they're coming anyway. And so is there a way that can be a stimulus for some generosity? So that those are some things. And then the other thing, before you make any decisions, that analysis I talked about first is critical, because I've seen it before. Actually, I had a synod. It wasn't South Carolina. I won't tell you which one, but it wasn't yours. The bishop contacted me last night and said, here's the note from our financial person. They're down about $50,000 through April 20th of this year compared to what they were April 20th of last year. And I sent back, I said, well, Bishop, this doesn't tell me anything, because I don't know who's changed behavior. Like it could just be the timing of the largest congregation in the synod didn't send their check in yet, but they had done it by this time last year. Which congregation, did every congregation cut 20%? Because if they did that, then we're in serious trouble. But I'm guessing that's not what happened. I'm guessing 3 to 5 congregations decided not to pay in March or April yet to see how it was going. And I bet if the bishop calls those 3 to 5 congregations, they'll recognize that they're not living what they're preaching to their people. And so I think it might change quickly. So that bishop is getting me a list of the top 10 declining congregations. And we're going to walk through that together to see what's going on. And before we say, obviously, we're not going to have any money, we're going to actually know what's going on. In a congregational setting, you know, if one year your largest donor gives their entire gift in March, which just happened in a congregation this year that I'm working with, the donor said, you know what, it's going to be tough. I'm going to go ahead and give my entire offering now so that we have cash flow. Well, next year, that's going to be an issue because it's going to show up that much revenue came in, you know, the first part of the year. So we're going to have to remember that next year when we analyze what might be there or might not be there. So we actually can't just look at total dollars versus total dollars. There's a revenue source behind each of them. And we've really got to dig into that before we actually know anything. Because we could be reactionary when we don't need to be. Could be 95% of our donors have increased their giving and we're just missing gifts from 5%. Let's focus on that 5%, you know, and those that aren't dead, haven't moved away and aren't really mad at us, we'll follow up with, you know.
Yeah.
I tend not to follow up with dead or moved away or really mad. Those are the only people I've been known to try to go after people that moved, but that's another story for another time. So. Is that helpful for your situation or?
Sure.
Okay.
I really like the just how have you been generous in these days question for council and others, because, you know, some of our generosity stories have been, what I've been hearing are they're giving, you know, twice as much tips to the people who they're delivering their food or other things that aren't necessarily connected to church giving, but it really is a sense of generosity out there. So I appreciated that insight and maybe a way to identify how God's working in that way.
Yeah, good. Jan, are you representing your congregation or what brings you here today?
Because I've been a pastor in the Synod since 1969,
Right.
and I'm with a group of people that part of the supply team in several places.
Mm-hmm.
I think about a couple of things that was in your other presentation, and it's the point you make now. I look back, and from the first year of my ministry in 1969, I started looking at the offering envelopes on Monday morning. And I'd started it, and throughout my parish ministry, I reviewed the offering envelopes on Monday morning from a point of pastoral care. Because I figured out very early on that giving was a reflection of what's going on within a congregation's home. So if giving stopped, I didn't show up and say, I saw your giving stopped, but what's going on? How can I be helpful? Mm-hmm. If giving increased dramatically, I indicated in some way, that kind of thing. In later years, I realized that was also a stewardship effort. Well, right now in the quarantine period, when I can't travel, I've been using the phone to make my Novus Way visits by phone. And I've been making two. One was to the most vulnerable people that I know to check out how are you doing? And the second is just following up gifts. You know, a personal thank you. You're going to get the official letter. But I just want to thank you, and I appreciate it. And listen to the stories. In more than one place, particularly from the elderly on fixed income, it's a generosity story. Mm-hmm. They've said to me, you know, the truth is my income isn't changing. I'm living on pensions, those kinds of things. I'm just not going to the grocery store as often. I'm not doing discretionary shopping. I'm in good shape, so I've increased my giving to the ministries that I know really matter. And those are the kinds of generosity stories that I'm spreading too as I go along. They're out there, and people are willing to share them and eager to talk about what you're doing.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thanks, Jan.
Good.
A couple other things that I just want to kind of reiterate here. And then again, if you want kind of back to the first steps that I had at the Siebert Foundation, you can just listen to the audio of that talk sometime as you're, you know, whatever, Anybody apply for the payroll protection program? Gary or?
We are talking about that.
Okay.
We tried. Well, basically, it was our child development center who was trying to apply to be able to keep paying those folks full salary, and we thought we had the paperwork ready like the first weekend, and it just kept dragging on and was a nightmare. And finally, and some of that could have been our bank that they weren't equipped for it, and it was.
We're using it for the same purpose, Eric.
Yeah, so that's what we tried, and we'll probably still try the second round and figure out. We're not very optimistic, but we'll see. So.
Sure, and the only thing I would say about it, I'm not here to tell you to do it, to not to do it, or how to do it. But if you do get it, please don't let that be the first story of generosity in your place. Like, make sure that stories of members' generosity have been told significantly before you say, oh, and by the way, the government sent us some money too. Because we don't, if people think somebody else is taking care of us, then they can say, well, apparently they don't need my gift then, I'll give somewhere else sort of thing, or I won't give. So just if you get it, make sure that there's another story told of generosity before that one comes out. And then just kind of the final thing I want to really reiterate here, and we can have a little more conversation or we can go about our day. Let's start saying thank you a little bit better during this time. So the same way that, if people do increase their generosity, let's write them a little personal note. Let's pick up the phone and call. Let's give a little bit more personal touch to that increased generosity, and the fact that, and the generosity from people who are hurting. If you know somebody, like salespeople, their income's going down unless they're in medical sales. Well, a lot of medical sales isn't even doing well, unless they're selling swabs and testing kits. There are going to be people with lower incomes. If those people continue to give what they've been giving, some gratitude for that really goes a long way. That I know it's a tough time in your life. Really appreciate you keeping your giving to the congregation strong. It can be that simple, but just let people know that. I had on a call yesterday, a pastor from Florida said they've begun getting gifts from people who aren't members. And they've implemented the practice that anytime somebody makes the first gift ever to the congregation, the pastor is notified and a phone call is made. Jan can tell you from Novus Way perspective that a new donor is like gold. And the other thing they're doing is they're telling you that they're interested in finding meaning in your congregation. And so if you do begin to get gifts from non-members because they've interacted with your online worship opportunities, pick up, whether it's $20 or $20,000, pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, we are just overwhelmed by your generosity. Thank you so much for your gratitude, for blessing us with your gift. We promise we're going to use it, to keep our ministry strong. And then I would say, why'd you choose to give to us? Let them tell you a story, and then you're going to have another story to share with people when you do that. So I'm not expecting us to see tons of those gifts, but I know those gifts are starting to happen a little bit. And so when they do, don't ignore them. I know a pastor who made 5 $1,000 gifts to 5 congregations that he served in his ministry career. Only one of them picked up, or actually, I think they sent a letter, but only one congregation showed any gratitude. That's not what we need to be known for. So I would say pick up the phone and call people. It's a time, and people, Jan can probably confirm this, but people are actually answering their phones now. Because I think they want to talk to somebody. Jan, have you experienced that you're getting more people picking up? It used to be the worst part of my job when I worked for Novus Way. I hated making phone calls because nobody wanted to answer the phone, but they're calling now, or they're answering now. So feel free to make those.
Yeah, I was going to say, and even I've tried to tell volunteers and others around me at Novus Way, in today's world, a personal message where a person has voicemail is not a waste of time at all either.
Not at all. Nope. Not at all. Not at all. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Mike, I'd just like to ask those who are on the call today, what ways could the Synod walk along with congregations, either more so in this crisis or as we begin to come out of it? What would be some of the things that might be helpful to be offered from the Synod to walk through with you in stewardship?
Ozzy, I have appreciated the things that have been sent out. I usually see it under the bishop's picture about, these are the resources that we've connected to and offered to suggest to you, including this webinar. Things about mission support, things about the CARES Act, et cetera. I've seen information sent out from them, most of which I have passed to the financial folks within my congregation. Those have been helpful.
Great, thank you. It's good to hear.
No, I would just echo that and trying to have something that's easily available to pass on for us as our discipleship team or the finance folks, either one, depending on it.
Okay.
Folks, again, oh, go ahead, Gary.
Ozzy, it just crossed my mind. Wonder if the Synod were to, if they hear of generosity stories, to publish some of those out that we could then share as well. Look what happened in this congregation. Redeemer wants to keep up with them.
Good. Yes, good. Thank you. That's good.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Gary. Thank you.
I have somebody coming in, so I'm going to have to step away.
All right.
Thank you.
And I think we're wrapped up.
Blessings, Gary.
Resources can give you more. Eric?
Yep, we're good.
Okay.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank
Take
you.
care.